The Singaporean dream is fading. Over the last 40 years, Singapore has transformed at extraordinary speed. Singapore has always been about movement. It's always been about immigrants, trade, and ambition. From the very beginning, the island nation, or before it even became a nation, was imagined as a strategic point on the global map. If India was the crown jewel of the British Empire, then Singapore was certainly the keystone that held that structure together, or that finalized that structure. Empire never is and never was gentle. Trade, power, control, all these things are deeply intertwined. The British East India Company didn't simply move spices and textiles across oceans. They monopolized the opium trade, a narcotic economy enforced through military power. They protected the pricing under imperial law. So whenever resistance emerged or opposition came about, war would then follow, and commerce and coercion moved together, indistinguishable from one another. So in many ways, the mechanics were not so different from the monopolies and cartels which we see today, except this one, the British East India Company, was backed by the most powerful empire on earth, who had the most advanced maritime and naval fleet and military force seen at the time. So it was during this critical junction that the trade routes that Singapore happened to be right in the center of would one day show itself, and it would show itself as Singapore. But to understand the present, we have to simplify the past. So let's just try to simplify things here. We're not going to go into the history of British rule today. That can be for another video. And the opium trade in which they operated. They were essentially getting 30% of their revenue from drugs, and opium being the main source of that economy at the time. I think it made up for approximately 30% of the trade activity of the British East India Company. But like I said, that's for another video for another time. Let's break down Singapore's history into four broad phases, if you will. The pre-colonial Malay Johor Sultanate period, being the first phase. The second phase is under British colonial rule, so when the colonizers got there and what they then did with the development of the early development of Singapore. And then of course the era of Lee Kuan Yew and the rise of the PAP, the People's Action Party. And finally, modern Singapore. So if we can break it down into these four eras, if ever there was a golden age, that would be placed right in that third phase, is what I believe many people would say. It was during this time that urgency was crucial. It was a time that demanded discipline and vision. The policies that were built and the institutions that were formed basically formed the foundations of prosperity that would later come. That's why many of today's successes rests on those foundations during the third phase of Singapore's history. As you know, history is never the work of one man alone. Whilst Lee Kuan Yew is often praised and accredited for the success of modern Singapore, it was really without the imperial trade routes and without the global positioning, without the language and diplomacy shaped by colonial history and the visionary naval explorer Sir Stamford Raffles, I believe modern Singapore would look very different, and Lee Kuan Yew probably would be a very different person as well, you know. And this brings us to the present question. Not whether Singapore succeeded, you know, because that part is undeniable. I mean, we all know Singapore is doing very well economically. The thing is that the dream, it's undeniable that the dream is beginning to fade. The dream that powered the rise of Singapore is certainly beginning to fade. So let's not mumble our words here. It's not a simple story of government failure. Singapore remains clean. It remains safe. It's definitely efficient and largely free from corruption. Public trust, while it might be tested, it still exists. And few nations function with this level of order. So on the surface, it feels close to paradise. Yet beneath the stability, there's definitely this tension which is growing quietly. Singapore now faces the same pressures seen across advanced economies, with the rising living costs, aging populations, slower social mobility, and a housing crisis which drifts further from reach with each passing year, you know, to its ordinary locals and to the less affluent, let's put it that way. A system designed to give everyone a stake in the future is becoming harder for the next generation to enter. Homes which are meant to anchor citizens are slowly becoming, or they feel like they're becoming a thing of the past, because when prices keep rising, then hope keeps diminishing. And it almost feels like ownership doesn't feel like a security thing anymore. It's more a thing of survival. So at the same time, the very same engines that power the success of Singapore, such as its policies on meritocracy, foreign investment, global labor flows, they also tend to produce unintended consequences. So opportunity expands, but so does inequality. And Singapore definitely continues to grow, but meaning becomes less certain. And this becomes very apparent when you talk to Singaporeans who are both citizens and perhaps expats. There is definitely a gap between the rich and the wealthy and the modest. I don't know if middle class is that still a thing? Is that still a term that we use? So there is no minimum wage in Singapore. Let's just get, like, that kind of blew my mind. There's no minimum wage. You know, can you imagine you go to a country and once you get a job, it's up to you to negotiate how much you're going to get paid and whether you can come up with an agreement or not. And I guess for the most part, as long as employers are responsible in terms of doing what's right for their workers, thinking in the best interest of their worker, then this is something which shouldn't be worried. But it's also a key point where abuse and it can just that key detail, no minimum wage, could be a huge Pandora's box of exploitation. Anyway, that's a video for another story. But just to put it in a nutshell, migrant workers who are offered wages that are maybe 5 to 10 times much higher than what it is in their home countries, in less developed or less advanced economies, places like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Philippines. They're promised, like, and I'm sure it's not just Singapore, but this is just one of those problems that come with globalization and a growing economy. When the labor is outsourced, you'll find that there's a phenomenon where people are brought over with the promise of high wages in comparison to their own countries. And see, some of them, when you're dealing with the unscrupulous employers or the agencies, they charge fees. There's the agent fees, there's the visa fees, there's the travel and living costs, so the airplane tickets and everything. And these people that have no money, they come to Singapore to make money. So obviously they don't have money to pay those things, so they're then offered like a credit system where they can then go into debt and work off the payments to pay off that debt. In the worst cases, they go home having gained very little, and like I said, in the worst cases, even in deeper debt than they were to begin with. So this, I guess, this is the effect of capitalism in hindsight. So meanwhile, you have global wealth which continues to flow inward. This pushes property prices and the values higher and higher. And in a city where the land is already scarce, this becomes this issue is very easily seen or recognized. So for the wealthy, property becomes legacy. They can buy properties which are known as freeholding. And I don't want to go into the details of HDB or anything like that, but basically they can buy properties for an indefinite amount of time, and they can keep passing it on down to their children and their children's children. It becomes generational wealth. And for ordinary citizens, it's like there's like a 99-year time limit. So after that 99 years, that property will then go back to the government, essentially. And the government will do with it what it wills, whether they smash it down and build a new place and resell it, or for the next generation. In a way, it is a system where it is kind of rigged towards the wealthy, and the normal little guy will not be able to do anything about it, basically, but that's the system that was created, and I guess that's how it works. And I guess it's the same in most countries. This is how capitalism works. Public housing does still exist, and subsidies are still given by the government. So on paper, the promise remains intact. This vision of giving all Singaporeans a place to live, that definitely is still good. I mean, that still remains on paper. But when you speak quietly with the younger Singaporeans, you begin to hear a different tone. Singaporeans nowadays, they're not angry, they're not rebellious. It's more of a quiet acceptance, a resignation, dreams postponed. They would rather avoid risk, and they would rather trade their passions for stability. It's a monotonous way of living, work, go home, sleep, repeat. It's a rhythm familiar not only in Singapore, but in Japan, in South Korea, and across much of the developed world. Then the question is no longer economic alone. It's one of emotion, even philosophy. What is the price of perfect order? What is the cost of absolute stability? Is safety still worth it? If it slowly erodes our simple joy of being alive, is safety still worth it? Is it worth the trade-off? Safety and security in a tiny box apartment for 99 years, while that trade-off slowly erodes our joie de vivre, our simple joy of being alive, as the French say. This is not only Singapore's question, it's a global one. So let's not bash on Singapore or the Singaporean government. That's not what this is about. It's an aging world we live in. It's a disillusioned generation we're dealing with. Systems that function, yet increasingly distant from the human spirit they were not meant to protect. So where does the next generation go from here? Can the dream evolve? Are we witnessing something larger? Are we witnessing something larger? Not the decline of one nation, but the closing chapter of an entire era in history. Maybe this is not the end of Singapore. Maybe it is the beginning of something the world has not yet named. I don't know. But perhaps the better question is this: what do you see coming next?